fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Now, joining us, as we said earlier, we've got Matthew Pauly. He's here to talk to us about MK-ULTRA mind control and his book, Murder of Time. Thank you for taking some time to discuss this.
Well, thank you very much, Warren. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Well, let's start out with some of the basics, because some people listening probably won't know what MK-ULTRA mind control is. So what's the history, and what kind of description can you give to what it is?
Sure. Well, just a very brief history. The first person I think to be named is Dr. Josef Mengele.
Yeah.
Mengele. And he was a very, very sick, sadist mind control scientist in the Nazi concentration camps who did experiments on usually twin Jewish children. And he was very interested in doing mind control. So he would do things like torture these children and torture them until they dissociated, which means their dominant personality would go to sleep. Then he would use hypnosis and try and, create alters, to try and create sort of subpersonalities, try and program them to do things. He was a very sick man, and he did horrible crimes against humanity. Then what happened is in 1945, the CIA, just after the war, had a Project Paperclip, it was called, where thousands of Nazi mind control rocket scientists and also Nazi mind control scientists were resettled into the United States. And they were given jobs in CIA, the military, research hospitals, academia. This is, by the way, documented in declassified CIA documents. WantToKnow.info is the most credible source I've found, and they have a mind control topic there. Also, then there was this project was started, this MK-ULTRA, which was really an umbrella project. Had about 150 subprojects, and one of them was called Subproject 68, or Artichoke, and that occurred in Canada, in Montreal, by a Dr. Ewan Cameron, who was a Scottish guy, American, who came up every week. He would come up from New York to Montreal, and he was a doctor, and he did this research on Canadians, and these were unsuspecting, unwilling. They had no idea what was being done to them. Young people, children, adults, and they did horrific mind control experiments. He called it psychic driving. And the first thing he would do was give them overcurrent electroshock, a much higher voltage amperage than is normal, and not just one dose, but like 4 or 5 doses in a day, and do that every day for like 3 weeks. And the amount of damage in terms of lost brain cells would be so significant. The idea is he called it depatterning, where he would try and erase their existing personality. Then he would put them to sleep chemically. And while they were chemically asleep, there would be a speaker under their pillow playing messages. And these were just any old arbitrary messages. One was telling a guy, "You killed your mother." And this was played for like 500,000 times while you're asleep, chemically asleep for like 3 weeks to a month. So people would come out of that so messed up that they were basically disabled for life. And obviously some died. We know at least a dozen died, and thousands were affected, and most were disabled. And when it went public, because he foolishly chose the wife of a politician who was in the parliament as one of his subjects. And so it went public, and, he was shut down, and the thing is, he was being funded by the CIA as well as by the Canadian government. And so that was the end of that. Then the hospital records were destroyed, so the people couldn't get any compensation. There was a handful that sued the government, or sued the CIA, in around 1980, and only about a dozen or so got compensation of about $100,000 each, which is not very much considering you've been disabled for life.
Right. And so did this, now, the CIA didn't stop this in the 70s then, and after the suing of the 80s, they just kept it going, you think?
Well, what happened there was a U.S. Senate, it was called the Church Committee hearings, and in 1977, they claimed, the CIA claimed that, look, in these hearings, under oath, oh, well, this is all in the past, we're not doing this anymore, we stopped a long time ago. And so that was for the public, that this was not happening anymore. We know that's not actually, that's not true, that's false. The former deputy director of the CIA, Victor Marchetti, came out publicly and stated that was a cover story. Those were his words. And you got to remember, this is somebody who's a former deputy director. Why would he be bad-mouthing his employer, former employer like that? And the only reason he would do that is if he really cared about democracy. And then we have also recently, in the last 15 years, there's people like myself, but they're much more pioneers in this than I was. People like Kathy O'Brien, Kathleen Sullivan. There's a whole handful of people who've written books and about their experience in the program. On the U.S. side, their experience in the program is more on the production side. In other words, these people have been turned into sleepers and create distinct subpersonalities, usually for women, beta sex slave, and then they're used to service very high-profile politicians and mobsters, and it's all very disturbing what was done to them, just horrific what was done to them. And also, there's an alpha, beta sex slave. There's also an alpha personality which is super aggressive, and they use that to kill people. So the people that have been experimented upon since the program officially closed have gone through horrors beyond belief, and I'm one of those people. I just wanted to mention that that this is documented at wanttoknow.info, and this site is very credible. The guy who, first of all, there's a dozen people sort of that are involved in the site that are all very established journalists, and also the guy who's running it, Fred Burks, is the former head interpreter at the State Department, and he personally interpreted for Clinton, Bush, and even Dick Cheney. And so he got out of that and decided that he wanted to do some good in the world. So he started this site, and all the declassified CIA documents are there, excellent written summaries, mainstream media coverage of this topic. Anyway, that's wanttoknow.info, and it's the mind control subtopic. So that's my brief summary.
Okay. Now, so MK-ULTRA, what does it stand for?
It's meant to be, my understanding is that the MK is the Latin Germanic mental control. And so since we got those several thousand mind control scientists in 1945, there was a very heavy German, specifically Nazi German influence. And so MK is thought to be from that Latin Germanic prefix, mental control.
And how did the U.S. get the ability to start experimenting on people from another country, such as Canada? I know they were close, especially during the war of the 40s. But was there some sort of agreement or something they had?
Right. Well, for 10 and a half years now, I've been a non-consensual research subject, and I have noticed that there's the Canadian paramilitary what we call the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, have been actually involved in 3 of the events. There's been around 5 or 7 events now. And the RCMP has been involved from the very start. And the only way that they could be involved is if there was an agreement. Now, back in, I guess it was about 1940, the Bavin, a guy named Bavin, was the head of the RCMP, and he was approached, and these are secret letters that have since come to light, and they're published. He was approached by Mr. Estabrooks of Colgate College in New York, who was into hypnosis and was saying, look, I want to, make some hypnotic program spies. Just give me access to a hospital or a jail for a week, and I'll work on some people, and we can do it. And the RCMP guy, Bavin, thought about it. They had some back and forth letters, and then decided, no, I don't think we should proceed with this at this time. It would be too risky. So that was in 1940. Now, we know that that was secret. Those discussions were secret. We only find out about them 60 years later. We know that from my experience, I have documented, and I mean, it's true. What's happened to me, that the RCMP were involved from the 2005 event, the 2007 event, and also in the May 2015 event. So therefore, there can be no question that the RCMP has a Cold War agreement sometime in the Cold War, because that's when they were justifying this human experimentation, saying, oh, well, we've got this enemy that's going to take over the world, this communism, we've got to, sacrifice people in the name of freedom, and these compromise decisions were made. And it's 2016 now, and they still seem to be operating on this agreement, thinking that this is acceptable behavior, when, of course, these are crimes against humanity. So there must exist an agreement between the two.
So when did this program start in your life? Like, where did it get into you? And what was the first, I guess, event or happening?
Okay, well, before answering that question, if you don't mind,
yep.
Just want to give just 30 seconds on just who I am. I'm a Canadian, born in Toronto to American parents. My father was a cultural anthropologist, a professor, and he was sort of a little bit on the radical side, but was always, he's for nonviolence and peace and everything, just very critical of government. And I grew up in that environment, and I joined what we call Katimavik up here, which is like the U.S. Peace Corps. And I worked for $1 a day doing physical labor, helping communities for 9 months. And then I went to university, and I got a degree in sociology and computer studies. Entered the workforce immediately here in Toronto, and worked in the computer field ever since, as a programmer, and all the way up, to systems analyst, and eventually to chief scientist of a publicly traded company that had most of my intellectual property. And I've been consulting to Fortune 500, and I'm on the 5th year right now of my the board of my neighborhood community association, trying to make the neighborhood better, trying to have it more accessible to low-income housing people, and trying to make sure that we have more trees and we have more moderation of the development that's going on. But anyway, I am a family man. I have a house here. I had a dog who died as a result of one of these experiments. And I just got selected. And so getting to your point, when did this start? In November of 2005, specifically on or about the 22nd, I was coerced into a 5-ton military van on Montgomery Avenue, which is the street that I live on, and this was just off of Yonge Street. Yonge Street was once the world's longest street. It splits Toronto north-south, right, going north from Lake Ontario. And I'm literally 3 blocks from the geographic center in a very nice neighborhood that has the lowest rate of violent crime. And I was coerced into this van, and they approached me on the street. And there was 2 guys, and it was 9:30 at night, and I was walking north on the west side, And I got to Hellendale, and just before I got to the corner of Hellendale, two guys approached me. One had his 5'11", short blonde hair, blue eyes, slim build, with an American accent. And another guy was 6'4", 220 pounds, dark hair, big burly mustache, and a slight Quebecois French accent. And the American says, "Are you Matthew?" I said, "Yeah." "Matthew Pauly?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, listen, Matthew, me and my friend here are peace officers, and we just want to know why you have 3 bottles of hydrogen peroxide in your basement." I said, well, okay, sure, I'll tell you the truth. I have them because I was using it as a disinfectant, because I was growing some mushrooms, because my wife suffers from migraine headaches. She wasn't responding to normal pharmacology, and she's very suffering. And I read that Central American Indians have a cure for this, which is a certain mushroom. And I was using this stuff as a disinfectant. They said, "Okay, do you have any more?" The Canadian said. And then I said, "No." He said, "Well, why not?" And the American jumped in and said, "Never mind, it's not important. Look, Matthew, we just have to ask you a few more questions about this. We have a van just over here. It's really cold outside. Why don't you just come with us for a few minutes?" And they proceeded to make me walk in front of them. And they guided me to cross the post office parking lot, which is again on Yonge Street, between Hellendale and Montgomery. So we're walking south to north. I stopped at the diagonal boom that stops the cars from coming in. It had like yellow and black stripes on it, and they said, "No, never mind. Just go ahead, go around it." So I went around it, and there was 3 orange sodium lights normally in that parking lot. They were off. The place was black, and once we got about midway through, and this is like empty postal vans on each side, it's really dark. I started to get a little nervous, and I stopped. And that's when the huge guy says to me, "Keep walking," in a loud voice. And I was, frightened and intimidated. And I decided, okay, I'll keep walking. And as we came to the other end of the parking lot, there was this 5-ton monocolor armored vehicle, which would look like approximately like a Brinks truck, an armored vehicle with bulletproof windows. And there was a door open in the back. A guy was holding it open from the inside, said, "Hi, Matthew, come on in." And there was an officer on the left side, on the right side, and also on the far north side, standing there with their legs sort of spread apart and their hands on their hips, making it very clear that I could not go that way. So, and 2 guys behind me. So I knew I was in trouble. And I got in, and the doorman said, "Watch your head," and he closed the door, and I sat down. It was all dark, and it was empty, and the other officers were outside, and one by one they came in. And this was an interrogation, but not just a regular interrogation. This was an anti-terrorist training exercise. And it was documented on the Department of National Defense in Canada on their website in 2006. It was called Joint Control Unified Command 2005. The actors were, the American was Joint Task Force, who, by the way, run Guantanamo Bay, and Joint Task Force 2, the Canadian Special Forces, and they were being trained. So we had the guy I call Red, because he had a red complexion, was being trained by Mitch, who was the guy with blonde hair, on how to do coercive, what they call enhanced interrogation techniques. The actual description of the exercise was group infiltration and enhanced interrogation techniques. But that was actually not telling the whole truth, because of the 3.5 hours I was in that van, the last hour and a half were mind control training. It was the American teaching the Canadian how to do MK-ULTRA Monarch torture trauma, dissociation, hypnosis-based mind control. And it was the most brutal thing I'd ever been through in my life.
So now, first of all, were they treating you like a terrorist, and why do you think they were doing that?
Yes. Well, I should say that this didn't just happen out of the blue. I actually had some expectation that I might be interrogated, and the reason is I'm a computer programmer, and I was working across from Pearson International Airport in Toronto. The second day of work for me was August 2nd of 2005 at a software company, and we were on the 4th floor, which is as high as the building would go because we're in the cone of airspace around an airport where you can't build tall buildings. We were the last building before the runway. So we had a beautiful view of the runway. And I was in the 4th floor, actually the 3rd floor kitchen, getting a coffee on my second day, and I was told earlier there was no planes landing because it was such brutal weather, really, really rainy and really, really windy and dark. And there was this white, bloated airframe coming across from right to left. And that would be from east to west. And I said, oh, well, what's this about? And they said, oh, he shouldn't be landing. And this plane, I had witnessed on my first day that all the planes touched down by midpoint on the runway. This plane was still 50 feet above the runway at the midpoint. And when it finally did land, towards the end of, beyond where it should have landed, it had 150-foot rooster tails of water coming from the wheels because it was hydroplaning, because there was so much water on that runway. And that was Air France 358. It was a Airbus A310, and it crashed in Toronto. They called it an overshoot, but the plane was completely destroyed. So, and then from our perspective, watching this, it looked like they all died because basically, this plane careened out of control. It was going about 100 miles an hour when it reached the end of the tarmac. It then knocked over a light stand, like a 9 or 10-foot light stand, and then it just proceeded to go across this bumpy field of grass that was like not like a golf course grass, but like really bunched up, bumpy grass. And it just bumped along that field for another couple hundred meters, and then it just disappeared into a gully or a ravine. And then within 30 seconds, smoke started rising. And the smoke was white smoke at first, and then it turned to thick black smoke. And from our perspective, it looked like really bad. And I put my arms on the kitchen sink, and I just started to brace myself and take deep breaths because I was starting to hyperventilate. Because, when you witness what looks like hundreds of people dying, it really it causes what's called psychological trauma. That is the nature of how post-traumatic stress disorder is induced. Is if you see threats to the life of somebody around you or yourself, and seeing a couple hundred people in an aircraft that looks like it's game over for those people, that's enough to do it for some of us. Anyway, and I fled the kitchen and I ran down the stairwell, the 4th floor stairwell, to get some fresh air. And on the way down the stairwell, I had sort of a vision almost of all these people dying and burning up. And I thought to myself, it doesn't matter if I'm Christian or Buddhist, I'm in trouble here because I denied their deaths. Because I actually argued with the programmers at first when they were pointing to this plane saying he's not going to stop. And they were young people, and I've been in the business a long time. I'm a little older for a programmer, and I thought that they know what they're talking about. I said, come on, you guys, listen, there's got to be another runway down at the end there. And I put my nose to the glass, and I looked, and there wasn't a runway. And anyway, I was running down that stairway, and I was blaming myself for arguing with these guys, and all these people are probably dying. And so I had this real horror, and so when I got out that stairwell and I stepped out into the grass, something had happened to me in that stairwell. And within hours, I had forgotten the whole thing. In other words, when a person dissociates, their dominant personality goes to sleep and they record everything in high definition, but they're not there. It's like a child is there. And when you come back to normal, you have no recollection of that period of time. And that's what happened. I had no memory of the air crash, the next day. And that's a very bad thing. Then 2.5 weeks later, I'm getting up to the reason of why I was chosen. So 2.5 weeks later in Toronto, August 19th, 2005, we had a tornado evacuation, which is very unusual. What happened was in Fergus, Ontario, a twister, touched down, did a lot of destruction. It was heading for Toronto, the most populous city in Canada. They had this evacuation, and my team, and I'm only 2.5 weeks on the job at this point, is kind of running around the Environment Canada website trying to figure out what to do. finally, at the very late point in the whole game, they said, we should evacuate. And this was the version 16. That's what we called this team. There's about 13 of us. And I argued with the team leader. I said, look, if there's a threat to the whole building here, we should be concerned about everybody, not just our team. We should be getting everybody out. And he argued. He was panicked at this point. He said, look, you don't understand. We've already talked to them. You're on your own. Just say you're on your own. And I said, okay, fine, I'm on my own. And so I stayed behind with one other guy. And there was, of course, other teams of people, but they weren't in the northwest corner or northeast corner of the building as we were. And so we were facing the tornado that was coming at us. And it was like the streetlights were out outside. Were on outside, even though it was like, middle of the afternoon. And they were on because it was so black. And then what happened was the last person going for the stairwell to go to the basement said, oh my God, it's coming, it's coming. And then they ran from the window and they left. And what happened was, it was like a whirly mop in the car wash covering the windshield, except this was the windows of an office building covered with leaves and garbage and grass. And it was just covering the windows. And then I heard this, sound as the air was being sucked through the window vents just below the windows to equalize the pressure. And then we heard these rocks hitting the windows. It sounded like gunshots. And that was like really, really bad because, of course, that's how you get injured in a tornado is by flying debris. And so when it looks like the windows are going to break, you've got trouble. So both me and the other guy who stayed behind jumped onto the floor, like literally got out of our office chairs and it hit the floor at the same half second. And we were under our desks. And we were under there for like 45 minutes. And what happened was I was there and looking up and the bottom of the desk is beige. The sides are beige. The floor is beige. And no matter which way I move, I can't feel like I'm safe because at any moment, the windows are going to bust in. And this tornado is going to, rip everything apart. And so I went into shock. And so after about 45 minutes of being in shock, somebody tried to come and help me, which was very nice of them. They were a hero. And they tried to lead me out from under my desk. They tried to get me down to the basement. The problem was they tried to take me down to that same stairwell where I had seen the plane crash and I had the vision afterwards of all these people dying. And I wouldn't go. Because to me, that stairwell was death. And when you're in severe shock, you become very irrational. And then he escalated. Once I came back to my desk, he came and got me again. This time, he had his daughter, who also worked there, wedge open the door, and he put his arm around my waist and tried to thrust me through that door. And of course, this is something you should never do to someone who's in shock, is to physically force them, because they're unpredictable. And I, who am a nonviolent person, in that moment thought that he was trying to kill me because that stairwell equaled death in my mind. And I pushed him. Really hard. I grabbed him by lapels and I kind of threw him back. And I didn't intend for this, but he was going back and towards the stairs, and he fell on the stairs. Thank God he grabbed the right handrail with his right arm, so the left handrail with his right arm, twisted his arm, but avoided falling down the stairs for all intents and purposes. But because I had been violent, he sat at the top of the stairs with me, and he tried to talk me down, and I wouldn't go. And they sealed up. I got his daughter to seal up the other doors and to try and talk me down. And eventually, my condition was so bad. One pupil was blown, super dilated. The other one was really small. And my vision had gone. I only could see in the edges. The middle was black. And I was dying of shock. And then they called the team from the basement, who were all Chinese. And they know, Chinese folks know how to get people out of shock, which is a rapid massage with about, 10 pairs of hands. And they forced me to lie on the ground, and I was in such bad shape that I was resisting. And one of them said, I've seen this before, because she was a former nurse. She said, the way he's resisting right now and everything, he's being psychotic, we've got to ask him some questions after. And Gary was the guy who had led me through the door, I'll take care of that. Sure enough, when they got me mostly out of shock, I'd say 3/4 out of shock, I was still in mild shock. He got his 200-pound nephew to come to the airport software company, and they took me to a darkened room on another floor. and he proceeded to interrogate me. Now, it turns out that this guy, Gary, the hero, was from World War II. He was a veteran, and he was the guy who was in Devil's Brigade, and that's a multi-nation special ops force that were fighting the Germans, and they got the name Devil's Brigade because the Germans were so afraid of these guys because they were special ops and they were really good, and they were trying to scare the Germans a lot, and the Germans called them the Black Devils because their faces would be painted black when they did their operations. So they took on the name the Devil's Brigade. I asked him what he did, when I first met him 2.5 weeks earlier. He said, I used to blow up bridges and stuff like that. And I said, wow. I said, that's great. Thank you so much for your service. And so I felt horrible that I had pushed this man. He's a war hero. And, but it wasn't me that did it. It was a person that was, basically not there. I was so badly in shock, and I was dying. But anyway, I still felt really bad. And so when he's interrogating me, his questions were, have you ever thought of harming yourself or harming other people? And I'm thinking to myself, in this still in mild shock, I'm going to lose my career. I'm going to be charged with assault, and you cannot be a programmer in high-security environments with a criminal record. So I thought to myself, that's it. I'm going to lose my career here. I'm going to be charged with assault. I better do something here. I better give him something. And I knew what he wanted, right? He wanted something to make me sound like threatening. Somehow I could be a problem. And I thought I'd distract him. So when he asked, have you ever thought of harming other people, I related a conversation that I'd had 10 years earlier, but not entirely accurately, with another programmer friend as we were lamenting a neoconservative politician who had done horrible, horrible things that had resulted in people's deaths. And as a result, I made it sound like me and my friend had been sort of conspiring and planning to do something to this guy. And I really talked it up, and it was stupid that I did that. I totally admit, and the thing is, when I did that, I was marked right there as a potential terrorist. And he called me. What happened is, of course, the next couple days, I ended up going home and not able to work because I have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm at home, and I get a call in October. So this was August 19th, 2005. I get a call in October, and it's Matthew. This is Gary calling. He said, yeah, hi, Gary. And I said, look, I'm just wondering, have you been interrogated yet? And I said, interrogated? By whom? He said, well, by the authorities. I said, no. He said, oh, those guys, geez. Oh, okay, bye, Matthew, and click. So that was in October. I said, I knew something was going to happen. And sure enough, about 2.5 weeks later, I had a gas company inspector, or purportedly a gas company inspector, show up at my door saying, I was named Jerry, stitched in his overalls, and saying, look, I'm from the gas company, and I'm a contractor, I work for them, and we have this energy conservation program, the TAPS program. I just want to have a look in your furnace room, and I'm going to turn down the temperature in your hot water tank, save you some money, and I'm going to give you some aerators for your faucets to reduce your consumption of hot water. It's a free program. And I, said, okay, great, and so I let him in. And once he got into my furnace room, he said, listen, could you go upstairs and turn the bathtub on full hot water? Now, I said, well, we have a bathtub down here because we have a basement bathroom. And he was very disappointed. He said, you have a bathtub down here? And I said, yeah. So I knew right away my antenna went up at that point. Why does this guy want to be alone in my furnace room? But I played along because I was feeling kind of, threatened a little bit at this point. And I thought, just better play along with this guy, get him out of my house. Anyway, I turned on the hot water, and for about 3 or 4 minutes, give him some time alone. And then I turned it off after having it on for 3 or 4 minutes. I go back to the furnace room, and he's quickly fixing up. What he's doing, he's putting a sticker on the hot water tank. It says TAPS program. He's putting a foam piece of insulation on the hot water pipe going out. And he said, great, we're all done here. And he's acting real nervous. And then he takes me upstairs to the breakfast countertop over here. It's sort of like a breakfast table. And he gave me this invoice in, I guess it was green, pink, and yellow copies. And I had to sign it for $0 with my signature. He said, great, here's some aerators. I got to go. And he basically, makes like a dart out the front door, doesn't stop at anybody else's house, gets in his van and just drives away. And later that night, I looked in the furnace room, and I have 3 balls of hydrogen peroxide. And I thought to myself, oh, this could be a problem. I've heard that this is not, I've heard that apparently this can be used for nefarious purposes. But I wasn't. I mean, I used it for quite legitimate purposes. But I knew that this was bad, that they saw that. So when they said to me on the street, why do you have 3 balls of hydrogen peroxide, I knew right there that it was because of that guy, that gas inspector. And I knew that, from the phone call from Gary, that had I been interrogated, that this was going to happen.
So now, do you remember then what kind of interrogation they gave you? Like what they said to you, what they were asking? Right.
Well, you would expect that there would be a whole bunch of questions about my conversation with Terry about this former neoconservative politician. In fact, there were very few questions about him. This was obviously a training exercise. The first thing that happened was when I got in the van is once all the other officers entered the van, they had me sit down at a fold-down table, and there was a corrugated steel or aluminum floor with like a half-inch gaps between 1-inch wide corrugation groove, or what do we call it, like hills. And then there was a torture chair in the back of the van that was actually facing forward. It was near the front of the van facing forward. But, between the divider, between the front and the back, there was 3 bright spotlights that were pulled out later. Anyway, they had me sit down at this table, and they did medical questionnaire, and they asked me about any, illnesses I had, any medications. And then they said, okay, spread your hands out and your fingers wide. So I spread my fingers wide, and then the RCMP officer pulled out a nail-pulling device. This is called showing the tools of torture. I later researched this, and this is classic in a torture, is that you want to, right off the bat, terrify the person. So he pulled out a single-hole puncher, and I said, is that a single-hole puncher? And he said, yeah, but it's been modified. And sure enough, the flange was removed. That normally separates the paper, and so it's easier to get a fingernail in there. And he proceeded to examine each one of my 10 fingers and have the other officers asking, so can you pull that one? Can you pull that one? And he'd sort of touch it to my finger and go, I don't know. It's a little short. And then he'd go to the next one. And one by one, each time they would do this, they'd look up at my face to see how terrified I was. And then after that little event, they had me spread my fingers even wider, and then they took out a knife. And first it was the Canadian guy going tap, 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 tap between all my fingers and going as fast as he could. And then the JTF American guy did it, and he was fast. He was faster than the Canadian. Obviously, he had more practice. And he was like tap, 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 and he went through all my fingers. And it was just, terrifying. And then they had me sit down at the torture chair, which was like something out of a movie. It had like 4.5-inch diameter tubing that made up the frame at the back, on each side of the back, and it was aluminum tubing, and there was black seatbelt material, 3.5-inch wide black seatbelt material woven between the frame points. And there was design, and the frame points went along the armrests as well. There was large diameter tubing along the armrests with the seatbelt webbing as well. And also with leg rests, same deal. So everywhere my body touched the chair, I was being supported by this black seatbelt material, which meant that there was no way I was going to get bruised, which causes evidence. And then I was leg cuffed. I was handcuffed. Then this is the RCMP guy who did this, and then he put a syringe in my left inside arm, in the middle there, opposite the elbow. And I said, is that sodium pentothal? And he said, what, have you had sodium pentothal before? I said, no. So why do you think it's sodium pentothal? I said, well, I don't know, it fits. And anyway, so the fact that he said that suggests to me there probably was sodium pentothal. Certainly the effects that I later researched matched what I felt then, which once he had taped down that syringe and he pushed it in, like just a little bit, I felt like I drank 4 beers in about 30 seconds. I was drunk. And then, once I was in the drunk phase, he then proceeded to put a shocking cuff on my upper right arm. And that had remote control on it. It felt like a blood pressure cuff, but it had wires in it. You could feel the thick wires. and then it went to a remote control. And I said, "What's that for?" And he said, "Well, that's to make sure you tell the truth." And sure enough, they used that and had a variable strength current so that I would be, they could modulate how much pain I experienced. And then he taped my eyelids open with medical tape, and I'd never seen a person so talented. I mean, he did that like a pro. Like, and at one point, my upper left actually hurt. I said, "Well, that hurts." He said, "Oh, I'll fix that." And he pulled it off and put it back on within 5 seconds. I mean, this guy had been taping eyelids for a long time. And then they put 3 bright floodlights on my face that came out of the ceiling. And then the interrogation started. "Are you a member of Hezbollah?" No. I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, okay? But anyway, no. And then, have you ever been a member of Hezbollah? No. Do you know anybody who's ever been a member of Hezbollah? No. Have you ever spoken to anybody at Hezbollah? No. And then about Hamas. Are you a member of Hamas? No, I'm not a member of Hamas. Have you ever known anybody? And so for each question, for each terrorist group, there would be 5 or 6 questions slightly differently about whether or not I had been a member. And so we went through all of these Arabic names, most of which I'd never heard of before. And this is, again, reinforcing that this had to be a training exercise, because why would they be why would they be asking me these questions, right? It doesn't fit. But it does fit if you consider that the person doing the training, the Joint Task Force guy, runs Guantanamo Bay. And who do they have at Guantanamo Bay? Well, mostly Arabics, people who speak Arabic. So it does fit in that sense. There were a few interesting ones. They say, "Are you a member of PETA?" I said, "Is that what PETA?" And these animal rights? "Oh, you mean the people for the ethical treatment of animals?" "Yeah, that's the one." No. And then I thought to myself, I didn't know that was a terrorist group. and then, "Are you a member of the White Panthers?" I said, "White Panthers? I thought it was Black Panthers." No, there's White Panthers now. No, I'm not a member of the White Panthers. And then, of course, there'd be 5 questions about that as well. So after going through all of this, then the American proceeded to teach the Canadian no-mark torture. So these are things to do to somebody to torture them that won't leave marks. And the one was an eyeball flick, where he asked me to close my eye, actually not close both eyelids, but close just one, so that he wanted me still to be able to see him. And then with the one that was closed, he'd take his finger and brace it off his thumb and go to give a flick and have that finger collide with my eyeball, the shuttered eyeball, and pushes the eyeball back into the eye socket and causes extreme pain. And then he showed the Canadian to do it, and the Canadian did it. And I sort of screamed, "Don't do that!" Oh. And then another one was grinding the joints of the. I won't go into all that. It's just really gross. But so after doing the teaching of the coercive interrogation techniques, then it moved on into the mind control, and that's where things got really, really strange. Basically, for those people who don't understand this whole idea of dissociation, this dissociation state is like it's like chopping a round of wood when you go camping. And the first time you chop the round of wood, it's really, really hard to chop it in half. It takes a lot of effort. A wedge is, often used. But once you have the half piece and you want to chop that in half, it's much easier to split. And once you have a quarter piece, to chop that in half, it's much easier to split. Well, it's the same thing with dissociation. And this is why they choose people, because I've talked to half a dozen MK-ULTRA victims like myself in the last year who have approached me. And we all have one thing in common. We all have had psychological traumas in our childhood that caused, like severe psychological traumas that caused us to dissociate. And that means that we have been preconditioned to split or dissociate fairly easily under torture. So it only took them about 15 minutes of continuous torture before I dissociated, whereas a person who's never been dissociated before, it might take many, many hours, many torture sessions over days of many hours until they finally dissociate. So that's why they choose people who have had severe psychological traumas. Anyway, they asked me this question: what is your Arabic name? Now, of course, I don't have an Arabic name, but it's a nonsensical question. And so I'd say, well, I don't have an Arabic name. And zzz, I get a shock. And then they ask the question again: what is your Arabic name? And it's Matthew? Zzz, right? And they said, no, Matthew, your name is Mohash in Arabic. I said, okay, what is your Arabic name? And I'd say, Mohash. Nothing. Okay, good. Matthew, what's your Arabic name? I'd say, Mohash. Zzz, right? So but I said, look, I told you the name. They said, no, we want your other Arabic name. And then I don't have another one. Zzz, and so what was happening was I was getting intermittent or random electric shocks. And so I was continuously given the same question, not like 10, 20, 30 times, but over 100, maybe 200 times. I was asked this question. And 1 out of every 2 or 3 times, I would get a shock, no matter what my answer was. Even if it was a no answer, it was my English name, it was the one in Arabic they told me my name translated to, or I made something up, didn't matter. 1 out of 3 times approximately, random electric shocks. And what happens to the brain, to the mind, when you are put into a situation that's essentially sadistic? It's sadistic. Someone is torturing you and they just want you to have pain and not be able to predict it. You don't know when the pain's coming, it just comes. It causes you to give up, and you withdraw and you withdraw and you withdraw, and your dominant personality shuts down and to protect itself. This is a normal human response. And what's left is this childlike presence, which is this childlike presence is the ideal state, because it means they can do stuff to you now, like hypnotize you. Because I remember the American JTF officer saying to the Canadian JTF2 officer, see the way he is right now? He's flickering against his eyelid taping consistently like that. That's one of the signs. And the other sign, watch this. And he puts his hand between the floodlights and my face, moves it quickly, so a shadow goes quickly over my face, and I cringe in the chair. In the restraints, I cringe away. He said, that's another sign. But you got to be careful. They go into shock really easy at this point. And Matthew, slow down your breathing. Don't go into shock. Slow down your breathing. So I slowed down my breathing. And so I've had 15 minutes of continuous torture. Okay? And then he pulls out this little cube. It was had a hologram inside. And the hologram was lit by 3 pulsating different color LEDs. Something like red, green, yellow, or something. And what this thing had in it was a Apollo 13 spacecraft on the moon. In the bottom left part of the cube, the upper right was an American eagle in a tree. And as the colors pulsated to a slightly different color, the hologram would animate, and the Apollo 13 spacecraft would lift off the moon, and the eagle would lift off the tree. It was beautiful. I mean, it was really, really pretty. And I was really, I was dissociated at that point. I was like a child, and I said, it's beautiful. Yeah, wow, that's really pretty. Can I touch it? And so he let me touch it, and he said, look, Matthew. So I was mesmerized. That's the definition of the guy named Mesmer, created hypnosis. And I was mesmerized. And he said, Matthew, listen, I want you now, what you're going to do is you're going to do everything I tell you to. And I'm going to tell you to say things, and you're going to say them exactly. And I want you to say, yes, you understand, and you're going to do that. I said, okay, yes, I understand. I'm going to do that. And then he proceeded to give me post-hypnotic suggestions to repeat. And the first one was, if I ever find a gun in my jacket pocket, I will immediately go to the first closet in my house. And before getting into the closet, I will turn the safety off on the handgun. And then he pulled out his all-chrome handgun to show me how to take a safety off. And the 2 regular Canadian forces, the driver and the radio or comms guy, went, woo, because big fancy, chrome gun. And he said, well, it's not going to look like this one. And then Burley, the RCMP officer, pulls out his Glock 9mm black gun and passes it over. Here, try mine, use mine. And he says, careful, it's loaded. And JCI goes, yeah, I know that. He always treats the RCMP guy pretty bad. But anyway, so he then shows me, while I'm, cuffed, of course, how to turn the safety off on the handgun. And so we get back to this post-hypnotic suggestion. When I find a gun in my jacket pocket, I will immediately go to the closest closet in my house. Before getting in the closet, I will turn the safety off on the handgun. Then I will step in the closet, I will close the door, and I will put the gun barrel to my head and pull the trigger in one smooth action, no delay. And I had to repeat this a dozen times. And what happens is, well, okay, so after repeating that a dozen times, then I had to repeat the following. I will never remember this program until I find a gun in my jacket pocket. And I repeat again, I will never remember this program until I find a gun in my jacket pocket. And I repeat that about 5 or 10 times. And what that does now, the subconscious is left with an assertion that I'm going to do the following behavior under these circumstances in the future. But it's also left with the suggestion that I'm not going to remember this suggestion unless the trigger is present. So what's tricky about that is now when you come out of that dissociative state that you've been put into through torture, you have, first of all, complete amnesia from anywhere from months to years, depending on how severe the trauma was. And you are walking around with a program in your head that can be triggered at any time. And you will not be able to remember that trigger. Only your subconscious mind knows about it until the trigger is present, and then suddenly you remember. And by luck and divine intervention, that never happened. I never found a gun in my jacket pocket before I remembered the suggestion, because eventually you do remember this stuff if you live long enough. It took me 4 years and 5 months after that November 2005 event before I remembered the mind control part. I mean, within a month, I remembered being tortured by military guys in an interrogation in a van. But it took 4 years and 5 months to remember the part that happened while I was dissociated, the mind control training.
So what was it that made you remember? Was there something that occurred, or?
What happened was I had undertaken to cure myself. I mean, first of all, I'm off work on long-term disability, and I am a fighter, and I immediately started doing therapy with a psychotherapist who had specialized in psychological trauma. Also, I found the Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, the psychological trauma unit, and I met with the chairman of that department and the lead doctor, and he put me on to one of his doctors who then took me on. He was a young doctor, and this is like an interesting case, and he took me on. And for years, 5 years in total, I saw this guy for psychological trauma treatment, and he was dedicated. And this is a guy who has moved outside of Toronto after making a big impact here. And he lives out in the country near a small city not too far away that has a Canadian Air Force base nearby. And so he's now the lead of the Department of Psychiatrists that just most of their work is treating vets of the Afghan war who have post-traumatic stress disorder. Anyway, he was extremely dedicated, and he actually produced a letter for me, which is in the preface of my book. And this letter states that I'll tell you, it says right here, this is to certify that I've known Matthew Pauly since the spring of 2006, and I've been meeting with him regularly in psychiatric follow-up since that time. He initially presented with symptoms consistent with PTSD associated with vivid memories of having been tortured by government anti-terrorist forces in a van on or about November 26, 2005. At that point, a couple of days off. Since his initial presentation, he has had trials of 3 different antipsychotic medications due to my concerns that these memories might be false. This includes a trial with clozapine, well known to be an antipsychotic with superior efficacy. He retains full memory and certainty of the events in question despite these trials. He has not been diagnosed with a delusional disorder. He has never presented with suicidal ideations, intentions, or plans. I insisted on that last paragraph. So the point about this letter is this lead doctor of the psychological trauma unit was from South America, and Dr. Alex Tarnopolsky, and he said to me, Matthew, I know a thing or two about torture. And he said, no one's going to believe your story until you prove that you're not delusional. You've got to take these drugs. And so I agreed. And so over 5 years, I went on these 6-month drug trials, and these were like debilitating drugs. For people, I feel sorry for people who have to take these drugs. But I did it because I wanted to prove that I'm not delusional, that this is true, this happened. And sure enough, after 5 years, I got that letter, which is the best you can get. They can't say that, what you're reporting is true, but because they're doctors, what they can say is that, you have been tested thoroughly, and you do not have a delusional illness. Nothing was found. So either I'm making things up because I got nothing better to do, which would be completely outrageous because I'm a computer expert. I really love my work, and I make a lot of money doing it. But I'm actually unable to work right now from post-traumatic stress disorder because after all of that treatment, the activities did not stop with that 2005 event. They kept going. In 2008, I started writing my book. I decided as a responsible citizen, I need to tell everybody about what was done to me. And I sent the book unencrypted on the internet to my editor. And within about 2 weeks, I was picked up. And I was pulled into a van. And it was forced ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock. And I was picked up in broad daylight. I mean, it was like, 6 o'clock in the evening on about Q3 of 2007. And it was a really interesting, tricky way they did it. I mean, I've never seen, it was like a movie. I mean, I'm walking down King Street. I'm walking east on the north side. The van is on my right. I'm near the curb, maybe 5 feet from the curb. It's on my right, about a quarter block ahead. I'm getting nervous. I'm thinking to myself, don't be paranoid. You can't run away just because you see a van. And as I'm getting closer, I notice there's a driver and there's a passenger. And I notice there's another guy in a suit, because I'm in a suit, and another guy in a suit walking towards me. So he's walking westbound, and he's to my left. And he alters his path, so he's like going to collide with me. So I sort of move towards the van more. And I'm getting closer to the van, and then he does it again. And now I'm within 2 feet of the van, and just as I pass the passenger side window, which is unrolled, I hear, Matthew. And I stop, and I turn and I look, and I see the outline, and it's the short blonde hair, and I hear the voice, and I know it's him. It's Mitch. And I saw the sun setting through the windshield, like time literally slowed down. And I saw the smearing and dust on the windshield of the setting sun that was illuminating it. And then I heard a click, and before I could even turn, it was the click of a side door. I was put in a headlock, and I had an inhalant-soaked rag held over my mouth and nose, and I started smelling fumes. I'm trying to resist, and I'm being pulled back in this van, and I'm out in 2 seconds flat. And I awake in this van. I'm in a low gurney, about a foot off the bottom of the van. I'm belted in, and I have a ball gag in my mouth. And I'm being told by Mitch, and the other guy, the RCP officer, is there too. That's the only 2 people. Matthew, you've been a bad boy. You've been talking to people. And I'm going, no. I'm trying to say no. And he's going, oh, don't lie to me, Matthew. We know you've been talking to lots of people. We warned you. You weren't supposed to talk. And then the RCMP guy puts this headset with metal ends on my temples. I can still feel remember the cold on my temples. And Mitch then has this remote control, and he says, clear. And then he flips the switch. And it was this maybe 1/8 of a second of buzzing, loud buzzing, 1/8 of a second, and then black. And then I'm feeling my arm being punched. So it's punching me in the arm, on my shoulder, and saying, Matthew, wake up, wake up. Matthew, wake up, wake up. And I'm sitting on the bench in this van. I don't know how I got there. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know who the other guy is. I don't know where I am. What's going on? How did I get here? And he says, listen, do you know where you are? I said, well, I'm in a van. Good. This is the Mitch. And he's saying, so do you know where you're going? I said, home. He said, good. And then the Canadian jumps in and says, okay, so where's your home? And I said, 400 Walmer Road. And he put his head in his hands, and he slowly started shaking his head back and forth. He's despondent. And then Mitch turns to me and says, no, Matthew, no, that's not your home. Your home is north of Eglinton, just 2 or 3 blocks, on the Young Subway North. You know? You remember now? I said, yeah, I remember. I hadn't lived at 400 Walmer Road for 6 years. That's how bad the ECT, the electroshock, was. They had wiped my destroyed so much my memory that I didn't even know where I lived, and it did stop my book. They let me out and they told me to go home, but he told me not to ever talk about what happened in this van. And I didn't know. I said, well, what happened? You know, I had no memory of how I got in the van or whatever. Anyway, so that stopped my book for a few years and made my programming a little bit more challenging because I'd lost, you know, not only billions of brain cells. That was the 2007 event. And then the 2008 event, I'm not going to detail because when I last detailed, I tried to talk about it on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. My internet went down immediately. So therefore I conclude it's probably not a good idea for me to talk about it. I will, however, if people are curious about what happened in 2008, which was my test, I will direct you to my interview with Sean Stone, and you can get there by just Googling 3 words, Stone, Pauly, my last name, Pauly, MK-ULTRA. So Stone, Pauly, MK-ULTRA. First hit will be that interview with Sean Stone. By the way, he's the son of Oliver Stone. He's a filmmaker. He's an actor. It's a very professional interview. And if you go to 27 minutes and 45 seconds, you will get to the point where I explain what happened in 2008. Now, I will take a breath here and let you go ahead and ask any questions.
Well,
I
I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, are you still, as they call, a sleeper, or are you still under some sort of mind control? Can they trigger you at this time now? And does that worry you? I mean, I guess, of course, it would. But also, how has this affected your life with your family, your job? How do they react to these happenings, to these events? So, you know, when you got, taken in the truck and these things, and you come back a different person, of course, has it changed how you deal with your day-to-day life?
Yes, I mean, but I'm trying to answer these questions in order. Am I still a sleeper? Well, that's a good question. What I have found through trial and error is that these memories of the torture trauma dissociative events where I'm hypnotized, which by the way have continued right into 2014 and 2015. I've had 3 home invasions in 2015. I've gone through 3 burglar alarm systems. I spent $10,000 on security, and it's like nothing. You know, when you have professionals that's what they do for a living, and they're trained by the government. It doesn't matter what your consumer grade equipment is. It's all penetrable. But anyway, it affects. Am I still a sleeper? So there's a period of time afterwards before you remember stuff. So there's a limited window of vulnerability where you haven't remembered everything yet, because if you imagine yourself moving in time, this is very actually interesting. So you're moving in time, and it turns out your memory is lagging behind about 6 months or 3 months. So that's a very, very dangerous situation. Not all the time, but for certain missing time events where suddenly a day will just disappear. Like the 2008 event, when I went to work the next morning after this big event, I sat down at my workstation at this pod. We had a really Silicon Valley kind of software shop, and I sat down. I'm sitting right beside my team leader, and he says to me, "Matthew, if you're going to be away for a day, at least send me a bloody email." And I said, oh, okay. I had no memory of being away for a day. As far as I knew, the previous day I was at work programming. I had missing time. And that's why I call my book The Murder of Time, Making and Unmasking a Sleeper. Because that's the primary experience of this, is that you have missing time. And then some number of months or years later, you will remember what happened, depending on the severity of the trauma. So that 2008 event took me 3 years and a half, 3.5 years to start having flashbacks to it. and then another 2 years before I had full recall. So it means that in terms of impact on my, am I still a sleeper? Well, I continue to do this therapy stuff and to continuously working on recalling everything. And then what I'm doing, obviously, is I'm taking huge precautions in my life to not let myself be vulnerable to being taken. So I don't travel on the highways, and I just keep it to the local streets. I really avoid the highways. I mean, if I have to, I will, but I try and avoid it. I have tape recorders at all times. I have car cams. I have body cams. I have serious security going on at the home. And I am constantly documenting anything that comes up in terms of if I recall anything, I document it and put it into a book. So the first book, The Murder of Time, is essentially like a dated series of events of in the first person, what it's like to go through to be an experimental subject of MK-ULTRA mind control research, which is quite interesting. And then I've had people say, well, a Canadian academic looked at the book before it was published and said, you must explain before you tell your story the context, the societal, with the power dynamics. So I've put on each side of the body of the book more of a high level. What does this really mean? This story, how does this fit into what's going on in the world? But anyway, back to your question. So the present time, my last event was in October-November of 2015. It was a home invasion, and I've documented everything that happened. And what's changed is instead of outdoor activities in 2015, it's been all indoor activities, which has been bad because it's now bringing it into my home. My wife is obviously terrorized that all this violence has occurred in our house. And so anyway, I'm trying to not let reduce the opportunity for access to me. What I really would like, of course, is for my own government to protect me. And I've made them aware. I've written to the Prime Minister. I've written to, the media organization, the CBC, and I've said, look, this is a matter of human rights. This is a matter of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, which is like your Bill of Rights down there. And we can't have Cold War agreements that allow human experimentation in mind control and the testing of chemical, radiological, and biological weapons on Canadian civilians. This is like antiquated, old-style, not acceptable thinking. We can't do this anymore. And I need protection. And I'm still waiting for them to really respond. I shouldn't say that. There's been a little bit of response. There has been some counter, what I call interference, being run by our own spy agency. And they've just been, following around to try and prevent me from being taken. But they're not 24/7. They're just, when they perceive the risk is highest, they'll follow me, which is good. But still, I need more than that. So, am I still a sleeper? Well, no, because all of the stuff that they've done to me, I've documented. And once you bring into the conscious mind these mind control programs, they're no longer effective, right? Because now that you know what the triggers are, your conscious mind picks up the trigger, not your subconscious mind. And your conscious mind goes, oh my God, that's the trigger. Well, I'm going to be, walk away from this situation. I don't want to, have anything to do with, that triggering material. So essentially it's like deprogramming, the individual. And there's even self-hypnosis involved as well. So I don't know if I've addressed that question of am I still a sleeper.
Yeah, I think so. And just in summary, what do you think the implications, what's the point of what they're doing? Like, what are they achieving from the mind control of people such as yourself?
Well, I think that's fairly evident in the original goals of the program were to not only develop a truth serum, but to develop ways of making people do things against their will, but not only against their will, of course, but against their self-interest and even survival. Well, what could that possibly be useful for? Well, if you want to have people think that there's a terror event like a mass shooting, and if you can get somebody to hang around with a gun, wearing fatigues and bulletproof vest after this mass shooting, and be kind of all confused, and have no memory of the event, and have some physical evidence that links them to the crime, that's very convenient, because now you can sell to the public, and the media will sell to the public this false flag terror event. The public gets frightened. It's called like fear porn, and it gets played over and over and over on all the stations. Everyone's terrified. The terrorists are out to get us. And the agenda is to cause people to be more willing to give up their constitutional rights. Their rights to freedom from arbitrary search and seizure, privacy, other things. And also to terrorize the public so they'll be more willing to support wars abroad to get the terrorists, which are usually, in fact, bogus. These are really about the organizations. If you look to who funded those organizations in the first place, you come full circle. And really it's about oil, opium, and geopolitical interest, and people making money on war. The same people who own much of the media, like this, you have a huge concentration of ownership in the U.S. Some of those same families also own defense contractor stock. And so, you've got a closed loop. And the public, I think, should be looking very, very closely at these terror events and asking, has that person been tested for scopolamine? Because most people are not aware, because we're never ever taught this, that there's even a substance that could do this. I just want to just give you this one thing here, that Dr. Camilo Arib, head of the toxicology unit of San Jose University Hospital, says scopolamine can turn a person into a robot. I can give you a gun and tell you to go kill someone, and you will do it. Okay, this is an expert on this topic, and I can tell you that, having been drugged with 6 times or 5 times, that it completely wipes free will, and you become a slave. And that ability to turn people into slaves, to make them do things against their self-interest, is extremely dangerous to our democracies, because it gives the power to the people who have that technology to create false flag terror events, assassinations, hate crimes. Dylan Roof, shot those black people. He was a white guy, so it looks like a hate crime. Terrorizes the public. Well, look a little deeper into his past, and you'll find that he's not a racist until the last 2 months. And someone got to him and did something to him. And so if we look at even the San Bernardino, we know there was 3 Caucasian men, all black, with bulletproof vests and gas masks, who had balaclavas on, and they had automatic weapons, and they were shooting. And this is by eyewitnesses at the scene, and people were dropping to the ground. But then you have this patsy sort of situation with this young Islam couple, and tweeting or with the Facebook post or something that there was a jihad thing. This is what's setting up a false flag, to make it look like there's a real terrorist event going on, and we should go and get the terrorists over in the Middle East or wherever, Europe, wherever it's going on. And it's really sad that the media plays it over and over and over. People are terrorized and they're propagandized into believing that this is reality. And it's a tragedy to our democracies. And it's happened up here in Canada as well. In 2014, we had a shooter in Ottawa that was, again, a total false flag event. And they do it with scopolamine, and they do it with this MK-ULTRA Monarch, mind control programming, which is torture, trauma, dissociation, and then hypnosis. And then at showtime, they give the scopolamine.
Well, I have to say thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Warren.
The subject was MK-ULTRA Mind Control, the book, Murder of Time, and our guest, Matthew Pauly.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll say it.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.